Okay, welcome back to another episode of Words That Kill. Today's guest is Mercedes Yardley, Bram Stoker nominee, and she's here to talk about the subject historic versus modern death. So I'm going to turn it over to her now and let her introduce herself. Take it away.
Hi, my name is Mercedes. They call me Miss Murder. I like to write dark fairy tales. I like to write death. So I'm really excited to be talking about this because this is right up my alley.
Yeah, you'll fit right in on this podcast.
Excellent. In fact, I would like to show you. You can see I have this dagger hanging up like right over my writing desk. It's actually an award, which is really cool. It has like the name and stuff written on it, but it's just a nice, and it's really sharp. I don't let my kids anywhere near it. But, you know, I just have a ukulele and a little dagger hanging up there, so.
Yeah. I've got one that looks similar. It's not an award, but in fact, I've got quite a few daggers, but that's another topic.
That's something we need to talk about at some point. Like, that really interests me.
Okay, so we'll start off with the question I ask everyone is, how do you craft a killer? And specifically to this topic, what are the differences between a modern killer and a historic one?
So I like to write about serial killers quite a bit. Actually, they show up in a lot of my work. And a lot of that I think is I'm from Bundy area. So there was a lot of that. My father's friends found one of the victims' bodies, and, you know, Bundy carved his name on a tree. And I had a teacher whose best friend was murdered by him. And so it was kind of leached into our psyche a little bit. So I like to craft killers that are devious. Mine, I like to do people that kind of you wouldn't expect is a killer per se. I think that's a little more scary than like the big hulking brute. But I think it's so easy to kill people these days. I think it's more easy to kill people than it used to be. On one hand, I would say it's harder because we have so many cameras around and it's harder to get away with the murder. But I think we just have so many more ways to kill. Like in the old days, the good old days, it was a weapon, right? It was you had your knife, you had your Jack the Ripper, you had, the axe murder of New Orleans that went around and killed a bunch of people and things like that. Women, historically, right, poison. But now there are so many different ways you can do it. You can do like like a chemical killing that you couldn't do before. You can do, the arsenic killings, do mass killings. And of course, like the mass shootings with guns that, you couldn't shoot a gun like you can shoot a gun now. You couldn't do that 200 years ago. You couldn't lay waste to people in ways that we can now. And that's pretty horrifying, honestly. But it's interesting that we have all this technology and we have all these things, but we're learning and devising new ways to kill. So you used to have to kill your victims kind of one by one, and you don't have to do that anymore. You can just kind of do a mass thing, and I think that's absolutely terrifying. But you couldn't do that. You can do that by yourself now. Whereas it used to be like like when you think of mass killings, like a long time ago, you think more of like the indigenous people being, shot by a group of people, or that sort of thing, where it would take a group of people to kind of slaughter another group. And now you can do that all by yourself. So yay, technology, I guess.
So would you say that when writing a historic killing as to writing a modern one, there's more of a personal touch with the historic killing, as maybe it's a little more impersonal with the modern one?
I would absolutely say that. I think you would have to choose your person a little more carefully, and it would be harder to do just because things are so impersonal and so easy nowadays. I think it would be a little more difficult to stalk somebody than it would be now. I think it would be more personal. Yeah. I actually have a character in a book where he's a serial killer and he kills people, and he's like, it used to be harder than this. And like you ladies just keep, and he focuses on women. He's like, you ladies just give up because, they're just like, we're tired. Like, just kill us, whatever. And he's like, it used to be harder. Like, you guys used to make it harder, honest. But yeah, that there is such an impersonality, I think, in society anyway right now, kind of. We all kind of hold each other at bay and do these things and do what we can to step back, and I love that. Yeah, I think it was more personal before. I think it was more, and you were closer before. If you were shooting someone with a gun, you're closer than you have to be now. If you were, if you have your bayonet, you're right up in their face. And we can do things farther away. We can send anthrax through the mail. now and not be close. We can do bombs with like detonation from far away. And I think we've just kind of cut ourselves off from, how do you say that without using the word personal? Like the intimacy of killing. We do it from far away.
Well, it is an intimate act to kill someone.
It should be.
It's a horrible intimacy. It's a toxic intimacy, but it's still an intimate act.
Well, I live in Vegas where we had that mass shooting, the biggest mass shooting in America, and that wasn't intimate at all. No. That was some guy shooting down. If you look from where he shot down, you could just see people looked like just ants. They weren't people at all, and I think, before, if you were to shoot somebody before, it would have to be up close. You'd have to see their face. You'd have to be close enough, to see the whites of their eyes. I think that has changed a lot.
Yeah, well, like you said, the technology and the accuracy of guns have changed that, because before you couldn't shoot from far away because you wouldn't hit the person
right
you were trying to kill, plain and simple, because your weapon wasn't accurate enough.
Right. And people were bred for war in a different way. There was that terror that you knew you were going to see somebody die up close. You knew that's how it was going to be. And now, we can do airstrikes. We can do all sorts of different things, chemical warfare, put on your gas mask. You can make them inhuman. And before, I think killing seemed to be more carefully plotted, seemed to be much more, you pick your victim a little more carefully, and how are you going to get away with it, and how are you going to have access, especially, you couldn't travel quite as easily. Like now, you could, kill someone, hop a plane, and you're gone, but you would be someone most likely in your area. It would be someone that you were around, and just kind of a certain type of darkness it would take to be so involved in picking and choosing a victim in older times.
Okay. So what kind impact do settings have on a death scene?
It changes everything. Like so I'm from the desert, right? And so if you have a death scene in the desert, it's very different. If you take someone out in the desert to kill them, you have the wildlife that's there to carry off their bodies. You have, their skin getting burnt before something happens. And then I think of Seattle, where we also used to live, is very different. Like you would dispose of a body very differently in Seattle than you would in the desert. And just, what you would have around you. Like the desert, we have a lot of, very rural where we grew up. So, a lot of guns, a lot of knives, a lot of people that were killed in my area kind of in unusual ways and then just disposed of very quickly under the sand, And so I think where you are, you will have different, like you'd have a different death scene in a rural area than you would like in a city area, because you can't shoot a gun in the same way that you can in a city, or vice versa. Like you would have different things that you'd have to think about. Like, is someone going to overhear this? Is my neighbor going to see me? If you're torturing somebody for a death scene, you would take them somewhere differently. You wouldn't just do it like in your high rise, with like all your neighbors around. You'd have to completely put them in a different area. So I like that because it gives kind of more character to whatever it is that you're working on, like if you set it in a different place, it just kind of adds a different nuance and infuses like a different flavor into your work.
Hi, I'm Mercedes and Yardley. I'm coming at you from my kitchen. I wanted to talk to you today about Gutted. It's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful anthology. It's about beautiful horror, things that kick you in the gut, but have a sense of prettiness and that deep, dark beauty to it. It has stories by Neil Gaiman, Clive Barker, one by Brian Kirk will just ruin you. Damien Angelica Walters, Richard Thomas. There's a story in here by me, and I'm going to do a brief reading of it. It's called Water Thy Bones. There's a loveliness to bones, their shape, their weight, their strength and fragility. A body uses them to run, uses them to stand timidly against a wall. They hold a person upright if they're working correctly. They're a framework for an entire system, a complete body, and the significance of that is very nearly overwhelming. Yet at the same time, bones are so exceptionally frail. They can be broken, sawed through, pulverized, bleached, painted, kept, valued, destroyed, remembered, taken. Oh yes, they can be taken, while the victim still hangs on them a skinned sack of meat. Veins still connect. Blood still carries oxygen back and forth like it's a precious thing. And at that point, it still is. That's when their beauty becomes something real. When bone is exposed to the air for the first time, and the marrow gasps as it breathes in deep, the rest of it, the tissue, gristle, and muscle, is pulled away, and the skeleton is allowed to be free. That's the part Michael Harrison liked the best. Peeling away the stinking red refuse and letting the white parts glitter and shine through is the most awe-inspiring kind of birth, the most natural. Give all of us time and nature will do it for us. But sometimes nature needs a push.
Okay, so does that also work with different eras?
Yeah, I would think so, definitely. Like what you're going to go and find, if I lived, a long time ago, maybe I could go find some rat poison, right? And that's pretty much what my access would be. I wouldn't be, able to do gasoline. I wouldn't be able to do, some of the more common things. So it does. When you choose to set it and where you choose to set it, I think it would completely change your scene.
Yeah, they did call arsenic the widow's best friend for a reason.
Right. Yeah, I loved how, women just are stereotypically known as poisoners, just like, that's what we could get our hands on, and that too would make it different. Like a woman going out to get something to kill somebody, back in an older era, it would be difficult to have a woman be like, okay, I'm going to go get a gun, an old-fashioned musket or whatnot. She wouldn't really have as much access to that, she would have to be, she wouldn't be able to go to a place to go acquire some of these things that as easily as, a man could. A woman would be in completely different areas, a woman down here would stand out, whereas a woman would blend in here. And so you have to think about the character and where they are and what, if you're going to kill somebody, you're going to really try and keep it on the down low, right? You're really going to try and blend in as much as you can. So that character would have to act in a way that would fit in with their setting. They couldn't stand out or they'd be at risk of being caught.
Yeah, and people wouldn't think twice of a woman in past ages going into a chemist shop, or I'm not sure what they called it in America, because most of my stuff's set in Britain, in historical stuff, and buying arsenic or buying strychnine, because that's what they used to kill rats, and there was
right, and a rat problem. Everybody understands that, you know. But a woman being like, I would like a really super sharp knife. Give it to me now. I'd like a dagger and I'd like it to like cut, and have the curve at the end. They'd be like, well, you send your husband in for that.
Okay. What eras affect the types of weapons you use?
I think axes are kind of always found, right? Axes go a long way back because you can use them on your farm, you can use them, just around the house and that sort of thing. Knives, I think to a certain extent, they're always knives, but maybe not dagger knives. I think farm equipment is something that you were pretty much always able to find to some extent. I know back in some of the older like Victorian eras, for women especially, it was, again with poisonings, the poison rings, that they could wear like an ornate jewelry and then like open their ring and drop some poison inside. Or you hear about women having kind of stereotypical things like poisoned hat pins or poisoned like hair pieces that they could use. Whereas when I think back to Victorian times and that sort of era, I don't think of women really particularly having overt weapons. Like, she's out with like an axe, not really, unless she's living on, the farm. I kind of feel back in that time there was sort of a societal expectation. And so a woman would have to have something kind of dainty, like, oh, I have this tiny little hat pin that I can stab you through the eye with. And it would have to be something that they could have in society without explaining it, Whereas now, I was going to say we're lucky enough to, and I mean that in a way because yay for freedom, but like, we're lucky enough that we can kill anybody with anything now. And, like, how do you say that without sounding like a freak? But we have the freedoms now that we can go buy anything that we want. I have a gun, I'm not going to kill anyone with it unless it's, it's for self-defense and it's absolutely darling. But it was easy for me to obtain, and we can go and find anything now, where I feel as a long time ago, it was very different for women. I feel that men could find revolvers, men could find, kind of basic weapons, knives for men more, and like I said, the farm tools, the good old pitchforks and stuff. But we didn't really, as women, we had to be kind of much more careful, I think. We had to be much more subtle about the way that we killed people, because it wasn't easy for us to do it. It wasn't easy for us to get a lot of these things. And now, equal opportunity murder, I guess.
Yeah, never underestimate the effectiveness of a hat pin. Those old-fashioned hat pins were long and sharp, and they were deadly if you wanted them to be.
I mean, they hurt even if they're not going to kill you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's why women had headaches all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But brooches, the long, I love that we can poison so many things. And then like with radium, when everyone was using radium kind of as a fun thing to paint your fingernails with and stuff, that was a really effective way to kill. Just nobody realized it at the time.
So when you're crafting a murder, a historic murder especially, what are the differences in the investigative limitations and the laws as opposed to a modern day murder?
Oh, I love that question. I was going to say this, I'll say it anyway. You can get away with murder back then. There wasn't, of course there were no fingerprints. There was, and if you go back, like when you talk about Lizzie Borden, for example, right? And she had blood found on her dress, and she told people, oh, that's from my monthlies. There's blood on my dress. My father was murdered. But that's menstrual blood. And people were like, okay, and just kind of step back from that line of questioning, and we won't discuss that. So, you are obviously, not involved, because I feel like now people would be all over that, and we can't fake like, oh, I'm too tender to talk about it. I can't talk about that murder. It makes me so upset. I feel like people didn't question like they used to. Or they didn't used to question like they do now. They would just take things at face value, especially if a woman said it. Like, oh, that's just, you're really stressing me out by talking about this. Well, we won't ask you about it then. And people also didn't think that the women were capable of a lot of these things, right? So I think that they didn't have to have the burden of proof that they do now. They were able to just investigate and kind of come up with crazy things. And then also the whole spiritualistic aspect of it, like, oh, it was a demon. That woman conjured a demon. That wouldn't hold up in court today. But back in some of the older times, it was amazing to see how many people were like, yeah, she did that by witchcraft, or he summoned something, and that was perfectly acceptable. There didn't really have to be any proof. So I feel like things weren't investigated very well at all. And they didn't seem to have a very good chain of command. And whatever the society influence was at the time just kind of became the law. So I think it's easier to have got away with stuff. And I think it was also easier to condemn people, because now we have to prove things in a way that didn't used to be the case.
Okay, so when writing historical murder and historical death, have you come across any death taboos that your characters would not cross a line about?
Necrophilia, pretty much. That's always been, thankfully frowned upon. I think that's something that most people wouldn't, historically, that's the line. That seems to be the line. Necrophilia and, desecration of the corpse in that way, or most of them didn't even do like mutilations. Like Jack the Ripper that's one of the reasons he was so shocking, is he mutilated, because it was a desecration that most people didn't do. There was a belief, especially kind of at the time, that the body kind of needed, you leave it intact, you didn't show your ankle. So the idea of like taking off someone's clothes and tearing them apart was just absolutely monstrous. So, but I would say necrophilia is that line.
Yeah, I know when autopsies first started coming into being performed on a regular basis, there was a lot of, I'm not sure if scandal's the right word, but yeah, there was a lot of hesitation on.
Well, yeah, an outcry, because, that sounds so cruel if you're not looking at it scientifically. And now we're like, oh, well, I understand why they're doing it. But at the time, that was just so unkind to a corpse. It's considered so disrespectful,
Okay, so desecration actually leads nicely into the next question, which is: have you ever put grave robbing or strange burial practices into any of your writing?
Not grave robbing yet, but strange burial practices definitely. In fact, the one I'm working on now has that going on. Grave robbing is a little bit ick to me. Doesn't mean I won't do it. I mean, in my work. Let me just clarify right now.
Yeah. Okay. So don't read one of my stories in Visions and Nightmares then if you don't like grave robbing.
No. Now so what's it called? Because now I'm super interested. I'm going to write it down.
Gears of the Undead, I believe, is the story in the Visions and Nightmares book. It's a steampunk story, but the opening scene is grave robbing. So, and there's other reasons why they're robbing graves too. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I want to read about that. I don't know how I would feel about writing that. I think it's because I buried 2 children. So to me, it's kind of a line that I personally feel uncomfortable with, because I'm like, oh, well, people I love very much are under there.
Oh, you may really find that story uncomfortable then.
Oh boy. Sold.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any problem doing bad things to my characters. So just be forewarned. Actually, that's not the worst story in that collection either. So.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I think the worst one's probably my Alice in Wonderland take, a horror version of Alice in Wonderland.
See, that sounds right up my alley, because Alice in Wonderland is so charming and so creepy. Okay, and is that in that same collection?
Yeah, all the stories in that collection are based on our women protagonists, and they're based on some kind of myth or fantasy sort of thing.
That's awesome.
Okay, so how does victimology differ between historic and modern times?
I think historically men tended to be victims more than women. A woman kind of tended to be held in a little bit higher regard. It was very scandalous to murder a woman. And now I think women are the primary victims, in a way. I mean, when you're talking about like violence, gang violence or random shootings or something, it's quite a huge male population. But I just recently learned that the number 1 cause of death for pregnant women is homicide. And that just shocked me. So I think that kind of that, okay, we don't hurt women thing has just totally gone by the wayside. And now we're just, and also hurting children back in kind of, long ago was just so taboo, and so you didn't do it, and I almost feel it wasn't like children were sacred. It was like children were, they were your part-time help, but you didn't hurt them. They weren't adults, so why would you hurt them? And there seemed to be more of a rationality and kind of a standard of who it was okay to hurt and who it was not okay to hurt. And now children and women are just, there's none of that respect, or being a child's not going to save you. And I think that's very sad.
Yeah, it is. So what's the oddest thing you've researched in relation to a character death?
What happens when characters lose their eyes before death or during death? Just kind of wanted to see what happened there if you take out someone's eyes and how the body responds to that. And I think another thing I researched that was a little bit darker was Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, and her murder. I went to this really amazing an exhibition of her death, and it was so dark. Like, I assumed she died a million different ways, but they said she died from the Glasgow smile and the shock and the hemorrhaging and stuff from that, and that was hard to take. So I guess some of the weirdest things I've researched have been like what the body can take and how much it can take before it can die, because I wanted to see how long a victim could stay alive in a way. But I tend not to torture most of my victims. When I'm talking about it, it's like they're gone, they're dead. And I kind of gloss over it in a way for the most part, because I tend to keep things fairly PG-13-ish, just because I can really go into that dark area, but I tend not to quite as much. Just personal preference.
Okay, so that I think is a good note to wrap this up on. And so I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
I am on Facebook as Mercedes Murdoch Yardley. I'm on Amazon. Just look up Mercedes M. Yardley. My blog is mercedesmyardley.com, and I'm on Twitter at MercedesMY, and I'm super active online because I spend way too much time there. So you can find me anywhere, pretty much.
Okay, great. And thank you for being here. It was a pleasure chatting with you. I enjoyed the talk. And join us sometime later for another episode of Words That Kill. And that's all for now. So bye.
Bryony Adams is the type of girl who got murdered. These are the opening lines to my book, Pretty Little Dead Girls, a novel of murder whimsy. Hi, I'm Mercedes M. Yardley. I'm the author of Pretty Little Dead Girls. It's a book about a star girl who is fated to be murdered. It's a magical surrealism book. It's fun, it's heartwarming, it's tense. It has to do with very dark subject matter about serial killing and the murders of women and how women are kind of tossed aside sometimes, and these things become commonplace. But it also has a wonderful cast of characters that do their best to rally around and protect someone they love. So it's a very heartwarming book. It has lush lyrical prose, is probably what it's known for, and it came out to some success. We would like to bring it to you in a completely new form of media. So enter my friend Orion Sangera, who is a comic book illustrator, a wonderful artist, and he does the most amazing, just whimsical, highly detailed things. And we would like to come together and pair up my prose with his art to do the Pretty Little Dead Girls, a graphic novel of murder and whimsy. Hello, I am Mercedes M. Yardley, and I'm going to be reading you my story called The Making of Asylum, Ophilia, and it came out in the Miscreations book, titled Miscreations, Gods, Monstrosities, and Other Horrors, which was edited by Doug Morano and Michael Bailey. I hope you enjoy. I'm just going to read you a little snippet of it, a few minutes. The Making of Asylum, Ophilia by Mercedes M. Yardley. Being mad wasn't enough. She also had to be beautiful. Thankfully, Brigitte, whose name means strong, firm, healthy woman, chose the perfect name for her baby girl. She named her Ophilia. What is in a name? So very much, Brigitte thought. The name Ophilia brings so many things to mind. Wonderful things, emotive things. She knew her lovely daughter would wander around with a garland of flowers in her hair. How did she know this? Because she, Brigitte, with her sturdy hands, would make that garland herself. She would weave it through Ophilia's long, loose curls. Ophilia's tresses would tumble, of course. She would grow her hair long and sit at her mother's knee while Brigitte cooed and sang and brushed Ophilia's wild locks. She would sing songs of madness.